There is a detail in the first official report about the Blevins settlement that has sat in the Sullivan County court record in Blountville, Tennessee for 148 years, and that no account of the case has ever foregrounded in the way it deserves. The report was filed by the county sheriff, a man named Levi Hartwell, on March 21, 1876. It is 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph describes the discovery. The second paragraph describes the investigation. The third paragraph states the finding and closes the matter. The detail is in the first paragraph in a sentence that Hartwell appears to have written and then considered leaving out, and then written anyway, as though the record required it, even if he was not certain what to do with it. The settlement was found in good order. The fires had been banked for some days. The food stores were full. The fields, where the early work had begun, showed recent disturbance, and the doors of every structure stood open, as though the last person through each one had expected to return. They did not return. 17 people lived in the Blevins settlement on the East Fork of Beaver Creek in northeastern Sullivan County, Tennessee, in the spring of 1876. They had been there since 1869, when the settlement was established by a man named Absalom Blevins, who had come from Scott County, Virginia, with his extended family, and had built a farming settlement on a stretch of creek bottomland that the county's tax records confirm was his from that year forward. By 1876, the settlement consisted of Absalom, his wife, 3 adult sons with their own households, a widowed daughter, and 7 children ranging in age from an infant to a 16-year-old. The settlement's connection to the broader Sullivan County community was maintained through the circuit minister who visited twice a year through a supply arrangement with a store in Kingsport 20 miles to the south, and through the postal route that ran within 2 miles of the settlement, and that was serviced in 1876 by a rider named Thomas Boone, who came through on the first Monday of each month. On the first Monday of March 1876, Thomas Boone approached the Blevins settlement on his regular route and found it empty. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. 17 people, an early March morning, every door standing open. I want to know where you were sitting when you hear what Sheriff Hartwell found when he rode out to Beaver Creek. The specific geography of the East Fork of Beaver Creek drainage is worth establishing in some detail before moving to the investigation, because it shapes everything about how the disappearance happened and why the official response was as limited as it was. The drainage ran through terrain that was characteristic of the northeastern Tennessee mountain country, a series of ridges and creek valleys that produced natural compartments in the landscape, each with its own access challenges, each effectively invisible from the others, in the way that heavily folded terrain makes things invisible, not because they are hidden, but because the landscape does not present them to your view unless you are already inside them. The road that connected the Blevins settlement to the broader Sullivan County network was a track rather than a maintained road, following the creek bottom through terrain that was wet in spring, dusty in summer, and genuinely treacherous in the ice and mud combination that characterized the weeks on either side of the March thaw. Thomas Boone, the postal rider who discovered the empty settlement on the first Monday of March 1876, was the only person with a regular documented reason to be on that road. There was no one else who came through on a schedule. There was no neighbor who was close enough to notice something wrong. There was the creek and the track and the settlement at the end of it, and Thomas Boone once a month. Sullivan County, Tennessee, in 1876, was a county navigating the particular difficulties of the post-Reconstruction transition, a county that had been loyally Unionist during the war, had weathered the subsequent decade with its basic institutional structure intact, and was, by the mid-1870s, attempting to establish the kind of normal governance that required its official institutions to function reliably in the remote settlements that the county's geography scattered across its ridges and creek drainages. The East Fork of Beaver Creek was one of the more remote of those drainages, approximately 20 miles from Blountville, in a direction that the county road network served only partially, requiring the final approach to be made by a track that was passable in summer and difficult in spring when the creek ran high from snowmelt. The remoteness of the Blevins settlement was the first difficulty that Sheriff Hartwell faced when Thomas Boone arrived in Kingsport on the afternoon of March 5th and reported what he had found. Hartwell did not reach the settlement until March 7th, 2 days after Boone's report, because the road conditions that week were exactly the conditions that the spring thaw and the creek drainage produced every year in that part of the county. He arrived with 2 deputies and Boone, who served as a guide, and they found exactly what Hartwell described in his first paragraph: a settlement in good order, doors standing open, fires banked, food stores full, and in the fields where someone had begun the early spring turning work, the evidence of effort interrupted. The second paragraph of Hartwell's report describes a 3-day investigation that followed. He searched the settlement structures and the surrounding terrain. He found no sign of fire, no sign of flood. The creek was running high but had not reached the settlement's ground level. He found no sign of violence in any of the 7 structures, no blood, no damage consistent with a physical conflict. He found in the outbuilding that the Blevins settlement used for tool storage an arrangement of personal items, hats, coats, a pair of working boots belonging to one of the sons, that Hartwell noted was inconsistent with a deliberate departure. People who planned to leave a settlement did not leave their hats and boots behind. He noted that the livestock, the cattle, the hogs, the 2 horses, were absent, which was consistent with a departure that involved taking the animals. He noted that the road leaving the settlement showed evidence of recent use in both directions, which meant nothing definitive. He noted that the church record kept by Absalom Blevins, which the supply arrangement with the Kingsport store identified as a document Blevins maintained and updated regularly, was present on the shelf in the main house, open to the last entry, which was dated February 19, 1876. The last entry was a record of a birth. Absalom's granddaughter, born to one of the son's wives, noted in Blevins's hand with the date, the child's name, and the phrase, "God willing she grows in this good place." There is a detail in Hartwell's investigation notes, separate from the official report filed as supplementary material in the same case file, that the official report does not address, and that one Sullivan County historian noted in a 1988 article without being able to interpret. On the second day of his investigation, Hartwell walked the perimeter of the settlement's fields and noted in his supplementary notes that the disturbance in the recently turned field was concentrated in the section farthest from the main house, the northeast corner, which was uphill from the creek and backed against the wooded slope above the bottomland. He described the disturbance in that corner as more extensive than the work would require if proceeding in the normal fashion from the accessible end. He noted it and did not develop the observation further in either his supplementary notes or his official report. The historian who identified the note in 1988 described it as puzzling without speculating about its significance. What it suggests, if you take it seriously as an observation by a man who had spent 2 days at the settlement looking carefully at everything, is that something in the northeast corner of the field warranted more attention than Hartwell's notes give it. Whether that attention was never given because Hartwell chose not to give it, or because the nature of what he was looking at was not something he wanted to put in a county record, or simply because he ran out of time before the creek conditions forced his departure, the supplementary notes do not establish. Hartwell spent 3 days at the settlement. He left on March 10th with no conclusion about what had happened to 17 people, including an infant born less than 3 weeks before the settlement was found empty. The third paragraph of the report states, "The Blevins family and associated household members appear to have departed the settlement voluntarily for reasons that the investigation has not established. The investigation found no evidence of foul play. The matter is referred to the county's attention in the event that the family makes contact or that further information becomes available." That is the complete official finding. The matter is referred to the county's attention. The county's attention, as far as the official record shows, never returned to it. The file remained open in the technical sense, not formally closed, not assigned a conclusive finding, until a records reorganization in the 1920s reclassified it as inactive. The file is in the Sullivan County Circuit Court records in Blountville. The church record that Hartwell found on the shelf in the Blevins' main house is not with it. It is noted in the investigation report as having been left in place, and whether it remained in the structure until the structure's eventual deterioration or collapse, or was removed at some point by a subsequent visitor to the abandoned settlement, is not established in any document the county records office has been able to identify. 3 weeks after Hartwell closed his investigation and returned to Blountville, a letter arrived at the Sullivan County Courthouse from the Scott County, Virginia court, asking whether Sullivan County had any knowledge of the whereabouts of the Blevins family. The Scott County Court had received a query from a relative of Absalom Blevins, a brother who lived in Lee County, Virginia, who had not heard from Absalom since a letter dated January 1876, and who was concerned about the family's welfare. The Sullivan County response, filed with the letter in the same court record that holds Hartwell's report, consists of one sentence in the county clerk's hand. Sullivan County has no knowledge of the current whereabouts of the Blevins family and refers the inquiry to the family's last known location in this county. The letter from the Lee County relative and the Sullivan County's one-sentence response are the last items in the file. After that, the file contains nothing. In the summer of 1876, a timber assessment crew working the East Fork of Beaver Creek drainage for a Virginia land speculation company passed within half a mile of the Blevin settlement site and noted it in their survey log as an abandoned farming settlement. The survey log, which is in the Virginia State Archives in Richmond as part of a collection of 19th-century land survey records, includes a brief description of the structures, which were still standing, and notes that the fields had reverted to early second-growth vegetation consistent with 1 to 2 seasons of neglect. The survey team did not enter the structures and did not note any investigation of the site. They logged it as abandoned and continued with their survey. This survey log entry is the last contemporary record of the Blevins settlement site in any document that researchers have identified. The Blevins family, Absalom, his wife, his 3 sons and their households, his widowed daughter, and 7 children, including a 3-week-old infant, did not appear in the 1880 federal census in Sullivan County, in Scott County, Virginia, in Lee County, Virginia, or in any of the surrounding Tennessee and Virginia counties that researchers working on this case have checked. The Lee County relative who had written to the Sullivan County Courthouse in 1876 does not appear to have pursued the matter further, or if he did, the pursuit left no surviving documentary trace. The family's origins in Scott County, Virginia, were checked by one historian in 1988 who published a brief account of the disappearance in a Sullivan County historical journal. He found records of the family's presence in Scott County through the late 1860s and nothing afterward. They came to Sullivan County in 1869, established the settlement on the East Fork of Beaver Creek, and in February or early March of 1876, they ceased to leave any record of their existence anywhere that any researcher has subsequently been able to find. There is one more document connected to the Blevins' disappearance that has not been addressed in any published account of it, and that belongs here because it is the only piece of the record that postdates the 1876 investigation by enough time to constitute a subsequent perspective on what the investigation had produced. In 1891, 15 years after the disappearance, a property survey was conducted of the East Fork of Beaver Creek bottomland as part of a land transaction involving the Blevins' original acreage, which had reverted to the county for unpaid taxes in the early 1880s and was being sold. The surveyor's notes from that survey are in the Sullivan County deed records in Blountville. They are 3 pages long and are primarily technical: measurements, boundaries, the standard documentation of a property assessment. The final paragraph contains a notation that is not standard. The surveyor noted that in the northeast corner of the former agricultural field, in the section farthest from the main house, there was an area of approximately 40 square feet where the soil and vegetation cover differed from the surrounding field in a way that he attributed in his notes to prior disturbance of a significant character, now substantially recovered. He did not speculate about the nature of the prior disturbance. He noted it and concluded the survey. The notation is in the deed records, in the same drawer as the property transfer documents. It has been there since 1891. The settlement site itself is today on private land in northeastern Sullivan County. The structures have long since collapsed or been cleared. The bottomland where the fields were, where Hartwell noted the recent disturbance of early spring turning work, is overgrown. The East Fork of Beaver Creek runs through it as it has always run. The church record, if it survived, has not been located. The last entry in it recorded the birth of a child named in her grandfather's hand and noted with a phrase, God willing she grows in this good place, that Hartwell read in the main house on March 7, 1876, and which is now the last surviving evidence that she existed. Here is the question that the Blevins settlement leaves behind, and it has two versions that require different things of you. The first version is the same version that covers most disappearances when you look at them from a sufficient distance. The family left. Something drove them out. Economic pressure, family conflict, a threat from outside the settlement that the official investigation was not able to identify, or simply a decision made in the winter of 1875 to 1876 that the settlement on the East Fork of Beaver Creek was not where they were going to build their lives. They took the livestock and they left. The open doors were carelessness or wind, or the decision of people who believed they were coming back and then did not. The infant made it. They are in a census somewhere, under a different county or a different state or a different name, and the record has simply not connected them to the family that left Sullivan County in early 1876. The second version takes Hartwell's first paragraph seriously. The fires banked for some days, the food stores full, the fields showing recent disturbance from work that had just begun, the coats and hats and working boots left in the outbuilding. The church record opened to an entry 3 weeks old, noting the birth of a child in a good place, God willing. These are not the details of a family that decided to leave. They are the details of a family that was interrupted. The church record entry from February 19th is the last thing Absalom Blevins wrote, and what it says, God willing she grows in this good place, is not the last entry of a man who was about to pack his household and his livestock and walk away from the good place. It is the entry of a man who expected to write more entries. The next entry never came. Which version do you believe? Tell me in the comments. Tell me whether the open doors are carelessness or evidence. Tell me what you think interrupted 17 people on the East Fork of Beaver Creek in the late winter of 1876, and why the record stops where it stops. If these frontier settlements and open doors and church records left open to unfinished entries are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. Hartwell wrote, as though the last person through each one had expected to return. He did not explain what he meant by that. He just wrote it down and closed the report and referred the matter to the county's attention. The county's attention never returned to it. Neither did the family. The surveyor's 1891 notation about the northeast corner of the field, 40 square feet of prior disturbance of a significant character, now substantially recovered, is in the deed records in Blountville. It sits 3 drawers down from Hartwell's investigation file. Nobody has formally connected them. Nobody has gone to the northeast corner of the former Blevins field and looked at what 15 years of recovery had grown over. The land changed hands in 1891 and has been private property since. The creek still runs through the bottomland. The track that Thomas Boone rode on the first Monday of each month is a county road now, and it is passable year-round, and nobody who drives it today has reason to know that it once led to 17 people and an open church record and an entry in a grandfather's hand about a child he hoped would grow in a good place. God willing, she grows in this good place. That is the last sentence of the last entry in the church record that Hartwell found on the shelf in the main house. He read it on March 7, 1876. He wrote down the detail about the open doors. He closed his report and referred the matter to the county's attention. The county's attention moved on. The doors are long gone now. The structures collapsed or were cleared decades ago. The bottomland where the fields were is overgrown in the way that abandoned agricultural land reverts after enough generations. The northeast corner of the former field, where the surveyor noted the prior disturbance in 1891, and where Hartwell had noted the concentrated disruption 3 days into his investigation, is indistinguishable from the surrounding second-growth forest today. 15 years of recovery in 1891 has become 148 years of recovery in 2024. And whatever the soil holds in that corner has been held for longer than anyone who could have asked about it has been alive. The church record, if it is anywhere, has not been located. The last entry in it noted the birth of a child on February 19, 1876, and described the good place where she was to grow, and that is the last documented evidence of her existence. but the doors were standing open on March 7, 1876, every one of them, and whatever walked out through them did not walk back. Hartwell wrote that down because the record required it. Some details require themselves to be recorded even when the recorder has no explanation for them. Hartwell wrote it down. 17 years later, the surveyor wrote down the northeast corner. The two notations have been in the same county building in Blountville since 1891, 3 drawers apart, never formally connected. The notation about the northeast corner, the detail about the open doors, 2 quiet, careful records of something a man noticed and wrote down and left for someone else to read. That is what the Blevins case leaves behind. That is one of them too.